Hello and welcome to the Digital Digest, your weekly breakfast of insights, tips and tricks and general information that will help anyone trying to move things forward in this digital world of accounting. This show is brought to you both by the Digital Disruptors and SB Digital, which are pushing the boundaries in this digital accounting space. I'm your host, Ryan Pearcy, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by James Grew from Automated Accounting to dive into the topic this week, which is on property software, comparing, contrasting what's out there and what you need to be looking at. So let's dive straight into this, James. We were talking a little bit earlier about the different areas that I guess property software can cover. So, from your perspective, how would you define or segment property software?
So for me, there's two main sides of it. There's basically property as a landlord, and then properties as a business, so an estate agent, letting agent. So sort of looking at client accounting, or whether it's just your own income and expenditure, effectively. Those are the two main, areas that really are relevant to property.
Yeah, completely agree. And then slicing it in a slightly different way as well. You've got like residential and commercial, and depending on what you're managing, what you own, the software that you're looking at may be slightly different. And as well as that, going deeper into, I guess, if it's what you're managing on behalf of others or what you're letting out, you've got the different types like B&B and hotels, etc., where you're managing kind of rooms or elements inside rooms as well, which work in a slightly different way, and some property management software handle as well, and some doesn't. But I'm just going to dive quickly into what I would class as property management software. What does it do, right? So it's handling, I guess, the financial side in and out, but some of the time piggybacking off of a financial piece of software such as Xero, QuickBooks Online, Sage Business Cloud, Free Agent, all of those out there. And then you've got that interaction with your tenants or your landlords if you're managing on behalf of many others, and potentially contractors as well for doing repairs. So those are kind of the areas that they generally cover. You've got the operational side pushing into finance, and maybe even a little bit of CRM and communication. Have you got any other areas, I guess, that you've seen property management software covered, James, from your experience working with them?
Those are the main areas. So yeah, it's sort of like it's about it should be a central hub for your communication, whether that be maintenance or tenants or landlords if you're managing that side of it. So yeah, the property software should be your central hub where you go to for all of that information. There is very good property software that it's probably one of the industries that's better integrated than others, as in you can have a piece of property software that you can create a tenancy agreement that goes off to an e-signing piece of software and then comes back in. As in there's potentially a lot of moving parts in property. And then again, as you were speaking about the financial integrations, and a lot of the time I think the softwares are quite complicated, but equally it means that some of the softwares are complicated to use, or everybody does it slightly differently. And the softwares sometimes get it right and sometimes get it wrong, or they try and be everything to everybody, and then
they try and cater for everyone, right? It means that you can be more flexible, but it does mean there's more challenges, more complexity, harder for people to grapple with. And I think that that's brilliant what you said about it's more complete, or it's more integrated, and you can do more with it. So I know that in some areas it can integrate into I guess the where it checks for tenants applicability, like how
exactly all of those. And then also sometimes there's like tenant apps, so that tenant can log a maintenance issue that then comes in. So some of them are very clever, and there are some great pieces of software out there. And as an industry, I'd say it has one of the most advanced sort of CRM IT infrastructure out there, because it is quite so hands-on and has a lot of moving parts, is receiving information from a lot of different places.
And I think there was a lot that could be done with it, right? Before, I guess, cloud technology really came to the fore, it was a horribly archaic way of doing it, and it ate a lot of time, and people would charge a lot to manage property. There's lots of people have property, and I guess agents would charge a lot. I think the software that's come in now has enhanced that relationship, potentially reduced the cost. I doubt fees have reduced, but enhanced, I guess, the service that's being provided. So let's dive into a few of the software that's in the market. I'm going to first touch on one that is aimed very much at the commercial side, because this is less well served, because there's less out there, right? You don't need as much choice. Released, RE then dash least, is probably the one that's completely taken over a market in this space from a commercial aspect. It's not cheap. It's quite costly. It's quite an investment, but it does handle it really well. It's really advanced. It can integrate into Xero. It handles it if you're managing properties, if you manage it on behalf of others. And it kind of stands head and shoulders above the rest from a cloud native perspective, from what I've seen in the UK. And the only other one that I've seen, I guess, handle, I guess, some of the commercial side, okay, not brilliantly, but okay, is Arthur Online, which we'll dive into in a bit more detail in a bit. But have you seen any others in this commercial space, or do you think Released has taken
No,
it?
I'd echo actually your comments on it. Yeah, I've used it for a couple of my clients, and it works very well. It has a nice actually API that you can actually use and absorb. So if you want to more complicated things, that is possible. Something that I look at a lot of the time. But yeah, so yeah, Released, I would say, is, as you say, not cheap, but does the job very well.
Yeah, you have to invest. I think you have to have a bit of a portfolio, right? Or you're based in London, one of the two.
Yeah,
As soon as you
it's
kind
not
of
something that I would use for a client that's got two HMOs or two buy-to-lets in somewhere. Yeah, it's overkill for that.
exactly, and that's where you can probably plug the gap with a simpler software such as Arthur Online. It can handle some of the nuances of commercial property, but it is and was created for residential property. And it started off, I guess, handling kind of one or two individual properties. And then as it's developed, it's one of the first that integrated into Xero early on. It has evolved into now doing a lot more, and it's not the cheapest in the market. You do have to invest in it. But they have some challenges. I've experienced them. I think they work very well with the landlord, if you're a landlord using the software. Bit more challenging if you're an agent managing it. And have you experienced a similar thing, James?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. You have to really understand what is going on. But basically, the way that it works from a landlord point of view, it's very simple. As in, you set up basically a bit like on Xero, a repeating invoice. That repeating invoice gets created in Xero. Then you reconcile that. Then that transaction goes back into Arthur to reconcile. From an estate agent, if you're managing a sort of client account type process, there's a whole load more moving parts, because you have an invoice that gets created that's for a tenant, so it's not actually your money, and then you have a sort of 10% management fee that goes on, and all of those transactions are trying to be done on Xero, and you end up with quite a, if you're not completely on it and have a completely structured brain on that, you can end up with a big mess with it, hundreds and hundreds of invoices being created very quickly if you're not careful.
Yeah, I agree, and the way it interacts with Xero, and I know they also picked out or moved the reconciliation into Arthur, that you could pick or choose between the two. That was a later development, but all the reporting, the compliance that goes around that, is something that I think was more of an afterthought, because they never planned to go into that space. And I know that's something they've had to develop a lot later, and had some early challenges with it. But there's others in this space that I think we should touch on. Let's come back to the estate agent side, because essentially that's much more complicated, and there's a lot more that goes on. So let's focus on those individual properties where you're a landlord, you're trying to manage them. You might be starting off with just one or two, and you want to build up that portfolio. One that's really tried to take this over in the UK is Landlord Studio. That's one that's probably a later arrival, but has been building its awareness out there, and probably its biggest competitor is Hammock, and they work in slightly different ways. So Landlord Studio very much piggybacks off of Xero, and Hammock kind of sits on its own and could push things into Xero if you need to, but generally you do all the operations, all your management inside the system on its own. Have you experienced any others in this space, or how do you compare and contrast those two, James?
I haven't really experienced any others in the space. Yeah, as you say, I think they're different. I think they're both, well, Hammock, you don't need a Xero integration. The idea is that you basically complete all of your tax filings on there and send it off. So that's a selling point, I think, for them. You don't need another subscription for Xero, which I think is probably fine for some of the easier clients. If you've got anything else going on in your world that you have to pay tax on, it gets more complicated. Landlord Studio, again, it is what it is. It sort of does the integration very well. If you want just a really simple way of doing it, you can just do it with repeating invoices on Xero or QuickBooks or Sage. If that's all you're trying to track finances, again, tracking codes is key for these kind of bits on there, so you can keep a track of it. But a lot of these things, as I always say, it's about the information going in correctly, or keeping on top of it. If you're not keeping on top of it, then it's pointless having any of these systems to keep a track of it.
Yeah, and the way I guess when I looked at this, and I think Landlord Studio came across from the US when it came over, it worked really well that if you were a business and you had a few properties, then that worked really well because it could integrate into Xero. You could do all your other operations in Xero, and it basically shared the relevant information from the property side. Hammock wasn't really built for that. It was built for if you were an individual with a property portfolio. It's, I believe, now released that element for if you are a limited company, you are managing your business, you need to create that profit and loss. You need to share the information, you need to get your compliance done. So it's kind of evolved a bit more over time. From a UI perspective, I guess my preference has always been Hammock in the way it was created. It was more for the UK market, understood that. Whereas I feel that Landlord Studio have had to kind of develop that understanding over time of what's been in the UK. But both software are worth exploring if you kind of on an owner managed, managing your own portfolio and you want to explore it in more depth. But if you're an estate agent and you kind of want to do this, the compliance side, I know that Rent HQ was one that could do this. I wouldn't say it's the best user interface in the world. Like if I compare it to Arthur and Lion's user interface is good, but the complexity made that difficult and the reporting made that difficult from an estate agent perspective. Rent HQ, I think the user interface is not that great, a little bit dated, but actually the compliance was all there. And I know there's others in this space as well, like Beds24, which is aimed more at the hotel and B&B side. And then Lofty Works, which is another one that was it's kind of in this rental space that I know integrates into Xero. And I know we were talking about it earlier. Go10 was one in this space, but is now kind of being absorbed into another property system. But James, I know you work in a very specific area of this from an estate agent perspective, focusing a lot on PayProp. Can you talk about what you do and how you do or how you work with PayProp?
Yeah, so normally if you're an estate agent landlord, you basically have to run a client account to do your client accounting. There's all sorts of regulations, reporting around that. And so that's basically where the main place where a tenant would pay their money into. You would then remove your management fee or, and pay any contractors from there and then go on from there. So PayProp creates that client account for you and then has a very nice user interface that does all of that integration and is basically held there centrally for you. And then, there is an integration now for Xero and QuickBooks and Sage that I've created to basically bring in the current account transactions. There are others on the market. Let's Pay, as an example, which again we're about to do an integration for. But they're not cheap to do. But the idea is that it takes out some security risk, as in like a lot of junior people, I would say, potentially at an estate agent are handling serious amounts of money, moving in and out transactions. So you want to basically fully lock that down on who is sending money here, there, and everywhere. I've seen some horror stories on, client money that's been moved to the wrong place, and trying to unpick that later. So again, risk reward on it. They're not cheap systems, but they do work well.
I guess more traditional, built specifically for the space over time, lacking, I get, the integrations into more modern systems, that the frustration for business in the space. They want the automation from utilizing cloud technology. Essentially what you've managed to do from your work in the space is resolve that by integrating. So you've got the best in breed from an operational point of view, best in breed from a finance solution. You've connected them. Essentially, is that a good summary?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment on it. PayProp have actually just been bought, or they've kind of merged with Repit, which is another big CRM player.
Yep.
And Alto and SME as sort of other CRM players. Those integrations are there. You can run all of your finances on that side in those systems, but they're more kind of download a CSV file, upload it in there, do the reconciliation, then re-download another Bax payment report to then re-upload. It's more manual, and there's less security
Around it,
involved
yeah.
around that. But yeah, a
Yeah,
lot of
I
them.
mean, whenever they say integrations and they say you've got to download and upload a file, I always go, yeah, not really an integration. You've
Yeah,
just made a report that's compatible.
yeah,
But it's the same with the payment space where, the biggest weakness really from a fraud perspective is that you can download a BAX file and then you upload a BAX file. And in between that, someone can type different information in because it's completely editable. Whereas if you've got a connected system via an API, that locks it down, and that's what you're doing. You're securing that side.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good time to kind of start talking about the summary of where these different systems sit. So we're focused on early on defining kind of commercial and residential, and you've got release from a commercial aspect, and you've got a lot of choice for residential, potentially likes of art that sit over the commercial side, and then you've got, if you own the portfolio yourself, or you've got if you're an estate agent and you've got the likes of Landlord Studio and Hammock that focus on owning that yourself. And then you've got a lot of choice from the estate agent side. It'd be really good to hear your viewpoint, James, on this, because I know you're a specialist in this space. How would you define, if a client's coming in this to go, I want to build from the ground up a new estate agency practice, what would you advise them to go down from a software stack?
So I'm a big zero advocate, and then PayProp, I think I would say is best in class at the moment, on from a client accounting point of view. I think Let's Pay have had a couple of issues, but they've solved those now. So that I think is the next thing. I would say PayProp is best in class at the moment, but from an estate agent, from a compliance point of view, an integration.
Nice one. So I always like to do kind of a bed by bin in these aspects where I'm going, okay, what's the one I'd be in bed with the entire time? Which is the one I buy because it's got the most potential, and which is the bin because it frustrates the heck out of me. I'm going to kick this off and I'm going to throw it over to you, James. I know you've never done this for me before, so I'm just putting you on the spot. But from my perspective, like what would I get into bed with if I could? It'd be Released. I think they're just solid. It's just solid. It owns that space. It's reliable. You've not really got a huge competition. But looking at a buy perspective, I'd probably go with Hammock. I think it's got a lot of potential that hasn't been fully tapped into. Really like what they've done there and how they've been building that. And I think that whole residential compliance side is going to grow over time as MTD properly kicks into gear for income tax. And then Bin, I mean, it's a tough one. I've had some terrible experiences with Arthur in the past, which probably means I'd have to put them in there. I believe it's evolved from the challenges it faced, but I think from my own experience, I'd probably have to put Arthur in the bin from my side. Over to you, James. Have you got some opinions on this?
Yeah, well, I'll start off where you ended. I think I would also put Arthur in the bin. I think there's just a case of where they've tried to make they've tried to make a product for everybody, and they've kind of you can make a big mess of it very, very quickly. What were the other two? Buy and
Bed. So
Bed.
what's got the biggest potential? Bed. What is the one that's your rock solid one now?
Yeah, well, PayProp I would probably bet. I've sort of got quite a good relationship with them, and then they do a solid product, and they're sort of bringing out lots of integration. Let's Pay, I think, is where I'd buy. I think they are up and coming as a kind of, they've just won a load of awards, and actually, I think that they've got a lot going on, and they're going to be a great competitor to to others in the market, and with integrations in them.
So. Oh, nice, and one that you're enhancing, I guess, with your integration that you're building as well. So, I guess it's an even better product in the longer term.
Yeah.
No, thanks very much for that, James. I think that's very valuable insights, something that I've learned from as well. So I think that's a great place to wrap up this week's show. Hopefully this episode has provided you listeners with valuable insights you can take forward, especially if you're in this property space or want to get into it. Please do check out the show notes for links to Digital Disruptors, SB Digital, Automated Accounting, and every other system that we refer to as we've gone through this. I know there've been a lot. If you want to ensure you catch future episodes, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure you look out for the release every Thursday morning. We look forward to speaking to you next week.